They didn't just take my land, they paved over my wife's resting place and told me to move on. 3 weeks in a hospital bed, and I returned to find 28 condos staked across 5 acres. My father and I cleared by hand the old oak where Lena's ashes sleep entombed under Building C. A rent-a-cop taps his pepper spray. The HOA president, Charlotte Voss, smiles like a realtor at a funeral and says it's too late to change anything. That's when the room in my chest goes cold. I'm Cole Mercer, combat engineer turned demolition contractor. They built fast. I take things down faster. You're about to see what happens when forged maps, smug speeches, and a ribbon-cutting collide with iron law and grief sharpened to a razor. This isn't a story about property values, it's about promises. And I intend to keep mine right to the last brick. Before we dive in, drop your city and local time in the comments so I know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the payoff. The morning after that gut-punch discovery, I drove straight to the Travis County Clerk's office, heart pounding like a jackhammer. I needed the truth in ink, not in HOA brochures. The woman at the desk, name tag read Janet, gave me that look bureaucrats save for the half-crazy. I slid my deed across the counter, original seal, notarized 1968, signed by my father and a county judge. She squinted at it, typed for a while, and said softly, "Yes, Mr. Mercer. The parcel is active, clean title, no liens, no sales." Relief hit me like a breath of oxygen, until she added, "But there's something odd. Magnolia Bluffs HOA filed a development intent 3 months ago, citing a boundary survey from 1997. That year was burned into my brain. Dad and the old rancher next door had once argued over 10 feet of fence line. They shook hands and never bothered to update the survey. Now, 26 years later, some smug pencil pusher had used that ancient sketch as a loophole to swallow my land whole. Paper walls make strong prisons when the wrong people hold the stapler. By noon, I had a name, Charlotte Voss, president of Magnolia Bluffs HOA. The internet painted her as a visionary community leader. Translation, an opportunist with perfect teeth and an ego built on property values. She'd worked in real estate long enough to know how to weaponize confusion. Her partner in crime was Derek Pruitt, vice president and legal liaison, a man with just enough law school to be dangerous. They'd partnered with Rivero Buildco, a discount developer famous for turning wetlands into instant suburbs. Together, they'd drafted Phase 4 of their little empire, 28 units of wood, vinyl, and hubris smack in the center of my inheritance. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read Magnolia Bluffs HOA. I almost ignored it. Curiosity won. "Mr. Mercer," came Charlotte's syrupy tone. "We heard you're concerned. Such an unfortunate mix-up. Why don't you join us at tonight's community meeting? We believe in transparency." "Transparency?" I repeated, tasting the lie. "Sure, I'll be there." The clubhouse sat at the heart of the subdivision, fresh beige paint, flickering fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Folding chairs filled every inch. Maybe 40 residents, most middle-aged couples, clutching HOA pamphlets, like hymn books. Charlotte stood at the front, tailored red suit, diamond brooch, catching the light like a signal flare. Beside her sat Derek, jaw-tight, papers stacked high. She opened with the performance of a lifetime. "We at Magnolia Bluffs believe in unity, beauty, and growth. Our Phase 4 expansion will increase everyone's property value by at least 20%. The crowd hummed approval. Then her tone softened. "However, one of our longtime neighbors has raised concerns about a small parcel mistakenly included in the development plan." All heads turned to me. I rose slowly, holding the deed high. "That small parcel has been in my family since 1968. Here's the signed record, notarized, stamped, and paid in full. You're building on my land." A murmur spread. Charlotte's smile didn't twitch. "Mr. Mercer, we appreciate your passion, but the plat map your deed references is obsolete. Our attorneys have reviewed county records from 1997. Those show the area as common green space. You see, paperwork can be messy." I leaned forward. "Messy doesn't mean you get to steal." Her eyes glinted the way predators glint right before they pounce. "We're offering to make this right. The board has approved a buyout, a very generous one. Take the money, Mr. Mercer. Let the community grow." A man in the front row, clipboard in hand, shouted, "About time someone cleaned up that jungle. It's been an eyesore for years." Others nodded, stirred by herd instinct. I stared at them, people who mowed their lawns twice a week but couldn't recognize a theft when it stood in front of them. "You built on a grave," I said quietly. "My wife's. You poured concrete over her ashes." That silenced the room, for half a breath. Then Charlotte tilted her head, lips tight in a mock frown. That's tragic, truly. But what's done is done. The concrete's poured, the investors have paid, and progress can't wait for sentiment. Progress. That word again, the moral deodorant for greed. I turned to the crowd. Progress doesn't mean paving over people's memories. It means building with respect. You think you're safe because of your bylaws and your golf carts. Try explaining adverse possession to a judge when your permits were forged. Someone hissed. He's threatening us, probably Derek. The room erupted in nervous chatter. Charlotte seized the moment. Mr. Mercer, please calm down. We're trying to be civil. Civil. They'd bulldozed my history and offered hush money with a smile. I gathered my papers and walked out, ignoring the eyes burning holes in my back. Outside, the Texas dusk smelled of dust and gasoline. Avery waited by my truck, worry etched across her face. Dad, they want to buy us out, I said. Her shoulders slumped. Maybe you should let them. I looked at her same amber eyes as her mother. If someone stole the place we buried your mom, would you sell it? She didn't answer. That night, I sat alone in my garage, lights off, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. On the workbench lay blueprints, bridges, warehouses, controlled demolitions from jobs I'd done years ago. Every line, every calculation whispered the same thing: you know how to bring things down. Still, I wasn't reckless. I needed proof more than emotion, more than outrage. I opened the county's public records portal and started digging. Development intent forms, environmental reports, zoning permits, pages of bureaucratic spaghetti. Every document listed the same signature: Charlotte Voss, President, Magnolia Bluffs HOA, acting on behalf of community-owned common area. No attached deed, no proof of sale, just confidence and forged conviction. I cross-checked the parcel ID. The number led straight back to my deed, still active, still mine. That was my smoking gun. But a gun without ammunition won't win a war. I printed everything, labeled it neatly, and called a friend who knew how to find answers buried under red tape: Priya Nandakumar, civil surveyor and map genius. She'd worked with me on city demo projects years ago. When she answered, her voice was still fast and sharp as ever. Cole, you sound like a man about to blow something up. Not yet, I said. I need you to look at some maps. HOA's claiming my land's theirs based on a '97 survey. Send it, she said. I'll cross-reference it with the municipal layers. If they used anything fuzzy, we'll see it. An hour later, her reply pinged in my inbox. This is garbage. She attached 2 images, one from the HOA's submission, a blurry photocopy with handwritten notes, and another, the official city infrastructure layer. A thick blue line ran under the center of my property. That, she wrote, is a municipal sewer main, installed 1,978. Easement still active. They built 12 of their units directly above it. That's illegal, Cole. Not a civil dispute, public safety violation. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. Relief, fury, vindication, they all hit at once. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had leverage. By morning, I'd printed her findings and slid them into a folder labeled Mercer vs. Magnolia Bluffs, Evidence 1. Then I poured a cup of black coffee and watched the sunrise over the half-finished condos from my back fence line. Workers moved like ants hammering, shouting, building faster as if speed could hide guilt. Charlotte thought she'd buried me under concrete. She had no idea I'd just dug up her foundation. The next few days I went quiet. To Charlotte and her clipboard army, it must have looked like I'd given up the old man licking his wounds, ready to sign whatever check they waved. That illusion was the first brick of my plan. In truth, I was spending every waking hour building a case, one screw, one photo, one ordinance at a time. When you've run a demolition company for 30 years, you learn that every building has a weak spot. So does every scam. I started by calling my crew chief, Randy Torres, a friend I trusted like a brother. Randy, I said, how do you feel about doing a little midnight scouting? He chuckled, the sound of gravel and mischief. Always up for a field trip. What are we looking for, rats or fraud? Both, I said. That night, we parked my old F-250 on a ridge, overlooking the condos. Floodlights glared across the site, bouncing off aluminum scaffolding. I handed Randy a pair of binoculars and pointed. See that trench line behind the third building? That's the sewer easement. He whistled low. They're building right over it, dead center, I said. And the city hasn't even realized it yet. We watched for an hour as workers poured concrete into forms directly above the marked easement zone. No permits posted, no inspectors in sight, the kind of corner cutting that gets people hurt. I recorded everything on my phone: timestamps, GPS coordinates, crew logos, even the cement truck's license plate. This isn't construction, Randy muttered. It's a cover-up with power tools. Exactly. And we're going to let them finish covering themselves. before I ripped the floor out from under them. The next morning I met Priya at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. She'd brought a rolled-up map tube and a look that said, "You're not going to like this." They didn't just cross the easement, Cole. They obliterated it. The pipe runs under 12 units, including the main drainage access. If that line bursts, you'll have raw sewage flooding their fancy condos. I leaned back, stunned. And the city signed off. They probably didn't even look. The HOA used an expedited small development clause meant for minor renovations. They slipped the paperwork through as a common area improvement, not a new construction. Priya spread the blueprints on the table and traced her finger over the red line of the easement. "You've got them. This is federal code violation territory, EPA, city utility laws, you name it. If you play this right, they'll lose everything." "Good," I said. "Then I'll play it slow." I didn't want to just win. I wanted them to feel it, the same helplessness they'd made me taste when I stood staring at that missing oak tree. That afternoon, I drove back to my workshop, an old airplane hangar turned office on the edge of town. Inside, under tarps and dust, sat the heart of my livelihood, 2 bulldozers, 1 excavator, and a dozen licensed demolition rigs. The place smelled of diesel rust and purpose. I locked the doors, pulled out my ledger, and started drafting plans, not blueprints this time, but a roadmap for revenge. Step 1, control the access road. Step 2, get the demolition permit quietly. Step 3, set the legal dominoes before touching a single wall. Randy dropped by later that evening with tacos and bad jokes. He found me knee-deep in county code printouts. "You know most guys your age would retire," he said, handing me a taco. "Retirement's for men who don't have ghosts to answer to," I replied. At 4 a.m., I drove to the property line with a flashlight and tape measure. The dirt access road that snaked through both parcels was narrow but vital. It was the only route their cement mixers could use. My father's original deed gave us exclusive access rights. It was written in black ink, notarized, and still valid. By dawn, I had my decision. If Charlotte wanted to build an empire on lies, I'd cut off her supply chain. At sunrise, I called Randy again. "Meet me at the site, bring the barriers." He showed up with a flatbed truck and 12 concrete barricades, each weighing a ton. Together we blocked the entire access road, sealing it like a tomb. I hung a professionally printed sign, "Private road, no trespassing access, granted only under deed #477B Mercer Family Holdings." By 7:15 a.m., the first cement truck arrived. The driver climbed down, staring at the barriers like he'd hit a wall in real life. "Hey, old man," he yelled. "We got deliveries to make." "Not here, you don't," I said, filming him calmly. "This road's private. You're trespassing." He cursed, radioed his supervisor, and within minutes, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. This is Carl from Rivero Build Co., the voice snapped. "You can't block a construction road. We have legal access through HOA authorization." "Authorization from thieves doesn't mean squat," I said. "This road's deeded to me. You're hauling across private property. I've got it recorded." There was silence. Then a low growl. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said. "You are." By noon, the site was chaos. Trucks backed up for miles, burning diesel workers, idle costs bleeding by the minute. Charlotte called, her voice brittle as glass. "Mr. Mercer, what on earth do you think you're doing?" "Enforcing my rights," I said. "You might want to reread the deed your lawyers ignored. You'll hear from our legal team." "I look forward to it," I said, and hung up. That small act, the roadblock, rattled them more than any lawsuit could. I could almost hear the cracks forming in their perfect suburban facade, but I wasn't finished. I needed the city on my side, or at least their stamp of ignorance. Bureaucracy is like dynamite, harmless until you use it right. The next day, I paid a visit to the Travis County Records Department, a dungeon of metal filing cabinets and humming fluorescent lights. Behind one of those desks sat Frank Delgado, a clerk I'd known since the 90-seconds. Years ago, my company had saved the archives during a basement flood. We'd hauled drenched files out by hand. Frank had never forgotten. "Cole Mercer," he said, breaking into a grin. "You still blowing up half the county for a living, only the illegal half," I said. "I need a quiet permit, no noise, no flags." He raised an eyebrow. "Quiet, huh? You in trouble. Someone built 28 condos on my land. I just want to take out the trash legally." I handed him the application. Under reason for demolition, I wrote unsafe, unauthorized structures erected without owner consent, violating Municipal Code 112B, utility easement protection. Frank read it twice, then looked up slowly. "You're serious." "Dead serious." He stamped it hard enough to shake the desk. "Permit #height 743 effective immediately. Valid for 90 days. And Cole, yeah, I didn't see you today. Appreciate it, I said, sliding the paper into my folder. Walking out of that dusty office felt like stepping into sunlight after a long storm. In my hand wasn't just paper, it was leverage a fuse, waiting for the right spark. That night I pinned the permit to my workshop wall beside a photograph of Lena under the old oak tree. Her smile, soft and steady, stared back at me like approval. They built it fast, I murmured to her photo. But I'm going to tear it down clean. The trap was set. The countdown had begun. Blocking the road felt good in a way that had nothing to do with victory. It felt like reclaiming breath. By sunrise, the barricades were a row of concrete teeth across the narrow dirt ribbon that led to Magnolia Bluffs. My sign sat in the center, crisp, laminated, legal sounding. I'd made sure of that. Deed numbers, notarized language, a polite but absolute sentence. Access restricted under deed #477B, Mercer Family Holdings. They reacted exactly like I thought they would, with panic, profanity, and expensive phone calls. Cement trucks idled on County Road 17 like a metallic herd. The site supervisor cursed into his phone. Rivero Buildco's project manager rang me from a blocked number and tried the old intimidation routine threats about liens injunctions. "We'll see you in court." I filmed him. I recorded everything. The more he ranted, the clearer his desperation sounded through the static. That day, Charlotte did two things that told me everything I needed to know. First, she marched right to the little cluster of men who served as the development's security and demanded I be removed. Second, she called the local paper and spun a neat, teary narrative about a dangerous, embittered owner sabotaging a community improvement. She knew the press would eat a villain. She'd made a career out of packaging stories. Within an hour, 2 sheriff deputies appeared on my driveway uniforms, pressed expressions that said they'd seen stranger neighborhood disputes, but were tired of them. Deputy Harlan had the look of a man who'd been on the same beat for 20 years. His partner was younger, quick, with polite questions. "We've received a complaint from Magnolia Bluffs," HOA Deputy Harlan said after introductions. "Claims of threats, intimidation, and illegal surveillance." His eyes flicked to the barricades, then to me. "Sir, can you explain?" I handed him my phone. "Watch this." I played the clip I'd taken the night before, a high-definition shot of an HOA-marked drone lifting from the clubhouse parking lot, buzzing over my property and hovering above my granddaughter's swing set. The timestamp was on there, clear as noon, and the registration tied the drone to the HOA's account. He watched in silence. Then his jaw tightened. "That's not great. We'll make a note of it." He asked me calm, professional questions about my actions and whether I'd threatened workers. I answered evenly. When I mentioned the deed and the concrete poured over the old oak, his expression shifted from procedural to human. "We'll follow up with both parties," he said. Their visit did what I expected. It cooled the town whispers for a day and left Charlotte flailing for a new narrative. The dangerous homeowner angle needed more than a drone to stick. But she had other tricks. Within 48 hours, a glossy, vacuum-sealed HOA newsletter arrived in every mailbox in Magnolia Bluffs, complete with smiling children on manicured lawns and a small boxed paragraph thanking the board for resolving the boundary questions. I'd never seen an image of a bulldozer look so stiffly wholesome. At home, Avery's anxiety sharpened. She kept replaying Charlotte's offer in her head, the check, the promise of security. "Dad, this is bigger than us," she said one evening, voice tight. "They have investors, lawyers. Please, consider it." She wanted our lives back to normal. Who could blame her? Her children had gone from backyard play to asking why Grandpa had the police at his house. I almost believed her for a moment. I wanted the shouting and the fear to stop. But when I closed my eyes, I could still see the stump where Lena's roots used to reach down into the earth. I could feel the empty place where a promise had been. That image didn't lend itself well to bargains. Instead of cashing out, I doubled down on the slow, boring work that wins battles. I fed Priya's survey data and Frank's quiet help into a dossier chain of custody timestamps, notarized maps, everything a judge or inspector would want to see. I called Marisol Vega, my construction attorney, and walked her through the municipal code sections that covered utility easements and public health risks. She listened, her mind filing possibilities like a machine. "We can move on an emergency basis," she said finally. "If the city inspector sees construction directly over a public sewer main, that's a public safety issue. We can get an injunction. Quietly, fast." Fast and quiet were my favorite things. Loud, messy lawyering plays well on cable news, but I wanted the legal hooks to be surgically placed. Marisol told me to expect pushback. Developers are loud and have resources. I told her I'd rather they use resources they couldn't get back than my family lose a tree in a memory. With Marisol working the legal side, Priya kept probing the site. She called me at odd hours with updates that were half technical and half vindictive joy. Cole, they just trenched right over a utility handhole. That's amateur hour. If the inspector drives the route this afternoon, they'll see exposed conduit and new fill. You won't have to do much, but point. I also used the time to tighten the noose on their logistics. Blocking the road triggered a cascade of added costs, rerouted trucks overtime for crews' spoil piles stranded on the wrong side of the barricade. Rivero's margins started to bleed. Investors began to send terse emails asking for updates and forecasts. Money makes people patient until it doesn't. Then they tried their first legal gambit, a trespass complaint against me, filed by someone with Charlotte's signature. It read like a form letter, and it was. My lawyer filed a prepared response and attached deeds, county printouts, and the drone video. The sheriff's office took a careful but uninterested tone. This was a civil fight masquerading as law enforcement theater. I'd expected that. What I didn't expect was Charlotte's next move, a smear campaign that slipped into darkness. Anonymous posts on community social media painted me as unpredictable, a man unstable after surgery. A friend at the hardware store told me someone had been asking about my medical records. That's when the edges of the fight stopped being legal and crossed into personal. I started to watch my own driveway at night, not to sneak revenge, but to make sure my family was safe. I installed a couple of extra cameras, legal ones, and shared their feeds with the sheriff. When one of the feeds caught a shadowy figure near our garage late at night, I froze. The woman fumbled with something near the window. My stomach dropped when I enhanced the image. The silhouette wore Charlotte's posture, the scarf, the familiar jut of hair in a tight bun. The next morning, I handed the clip to Deputy Harlan. They didn't just brush it off, they moved. 2 unmarked cars rolled into our cul-de-sac at 2 a.m. and watched the house for a few hours. The sheriff's department took the footage seriously because it was concrete, not gossip. Later that week, when the deputy pulled Charlotte's rental file and found a pattern of odd complaints she'd filed in other towns, the veneer of victimhood started to flake. Even with law and cameras on my side, the pressure was real. Avery slept poorly. The grandkids asked why bunk beds had shifted from fun to fortress. I found myself explaining rights and ordinances to an 8-year-old like it was bedtime story material. Grandpa Chloe asked one night, stuffed animal clutched to her chest, are people bad or just confused? I told her people can be both, and sometimes you have to stand up for the things that belong to you. By the end of week 2, the delays had turned into a rumor of investor default. Rivero called off non-essential crews. The county inspector, finally pushed by Marisol's papers and Priya's diagrams, scheduled a visit that same afternoon. Charlotte started to sweat. When the inspector arrived, he didn't bring drama. He brought a tape measure, a scanner, and a notebook. He walked the lines. He compared the filed plan to the real map. His face darkened as the inches turned into feet, and feet turned into blatant violation. That night, the county issued a preliminary notice stop work pending review. That paper carried the weight of a hammer. It was the first legal authority to actually force the construction to pause. Pause was enough for the little machine of compliance to start grinding. Charlotte's press releases shifted tone, less triumphant, more defensive. The buyout offer vanished from the newsletter. The sprinkling of confidence she'd dusted over Magnolia Bluffs began to blow away in the Texas wind. I hadn't toppled anything yet, but the fractures were visible. Rivero was bleeding, the board was whispering, the sheriff was watching, and my daughter could sleep without dreams of bulldozers for the first time in weeks. It was not a victory. It was the satisfying first crack of a longer plan. That evening, I sat on the tailgate of my truck with a thermos of coffee, staring at the barricade. The road I'd closed would open again someday, but only on my terms. I ran my thumb along the permit stamped in Frank's office and felt absurdly a sense of calm. The legal gears were engaged, the public safety angle was clear, and the county had finally looked up from its paperwork long enough to see what was under that concrete. There was still danger ahead. There would be tempers, headlines, threats, and legal filings. But for the first time since I'd seen that flat, cold slab where Lena used to be, I felt like the fight had an arc, and I had a plan. The next move would require patience, precision, and timing. I closed my thermos, stood, and walked back toward the house. Avery waited on the porch, and when our eyes met, she didn't ask me to sell the land anymore. She nodded like a soldier. We had work left to do. Getting that stamped permit from Frank felt like holding a loaded detonator, legal, clean, and invisible, the kind of weapon bureaucrats never see coming. Still, a piece of paper alone couldn't topple a regime of clipboards and cocktail dresses. I needed to make sure when the fuse burned, it would light every inch of their corruption in one go. The next morning, I poured coffee into a thermos, tucked the permit into a fireproof folder, and drove out to Magnolia Bluffs before dawn. The site was ghostly in the half-light rows of skeleton, condos, plastic sheeting flapping in the breeze, puddles of rainwater turning orange from rusting rebar. A sign stood proud at the entrance: Heritage in Progress, Phase 4 Development by Magnolia Bluffs HOA. I stopped in front of it, stared for a long minute, then took a slow, deliberate photo. Every monument deserves a headstone. By 8 o'clock, workers were rolling in trucks, coughing diesel foremen, barking orders, the smell of wet cement thick in the air. None of them knew that somewhere in the dusty county records basement sat a single document granting me full legal authority to erase every nail, every board, every self-congratulatory lie on this property. Before they noticed me, I drove off to the courthouse to see Marisol Vega. She was already in her office, neat as a scalpel, surrounded by towers of case files. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Frank called," she said. "He told me you've got something nuclear." I slid the permit across her desk. Filed, sealed, and invisible. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "Charlotte poured concrete over my wife's ashes," I said quietly. "I'm not here for half measures." Marisol tapped the paper, thoughtful. "The permit's good, but you'll want a court injunction to make it bulletproof. The city will drag its feet if they think they're complicit. I can file an emergency motion under public safety grounds, illegal structure, utility easement, violation, risk of contamination. How long will that take? Judge Garvey's on the bench this week. If we file today, he'll sign tomorrow morning." I smiled. "Perfect. Then Friday's ribbon-cutting ceremony will be her eulogy." While Marisol drafted the paperwork, I went home and prepared the other side of the plan, the physical one. Randy met me at the yard before noon. We loaded 2 bulldozers, 1 excavator, and a heavy-haul flatbed under cover of a routine maintenance log. No decals, no identifiers. Each machine gleamed from our last job, a warehouse teardown in San Marcos. Now they waited, patient metal beasts, hungry for their next bite. "You're serious about showing up during the ceremony?" Randy asked, leaning on the fender. "They'll have cameras," I said. "Good. Let the world see what justice looks like." He grinned, low and dangerous. "Then let's make it cinematic." That evening, while the rest of Magnolia Bluffs slept under their HOA-approved porch lights, I drove past the clubhouse. Inside, I saw Charlotte through the glass doors, rehearsing her speech in front of a mirror, gesturing, smiling, practicing sympathy like an art form. On the table beside her lay a folder labeled "Press Kit, Grand Opening." I snapped another picture from my truck. At home, Avery sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, kids asleep upstairs. She looked exhausted. "Dad," she said softly, "whatever you're planning, please make sure it doesn't ruin you." I sat across from her. "I've already been ruined, sweetheart. I'm just making sure they don't get to walk away clean." She didn't argue this time. She just nodded and whispered. "Then, make it count." Thursday morning came with rain. The city inspector's report leaked to local media an anonymous tip, "Thank you, Marisol," stating that Magnolia Bluffs HOA may have built over protected municipal utilities. The phrasing was cautious, but the effect was dynamite. Investors called emergency meetings. 2 backed out before noon. I spent the day pretending to run errands while quietly tracking news chatter online. The HOA's Facebook page went into lockdown. Comments vanished faster than they appeared. That night, the final piece clicked into place. Marisol called just after sunset. Judge Garvey signed the injunction. "You're officially cleared for immediate demolition of any unapproved or unsafe structures." Effective when 20 minutes ago. "Then it's time," I said. I met Randy and the crew at a diner off Highway 71. 6 men, all veterans of demolition jobs, sitting around coffee cups in unspoken loyalty. I laid out the plan. We move in before sunrise. Equipment already staged behind the tree line. We wait until 10 a.m., the ceremony start time. Once the crowd's gathered, I'll walk and present the injunction and give them the chance to back off. Randy grinned, and if they don't, I smiled. Then we give the evening news something to talk about. The next morning, Friday, was the kind of day they'd chosen for their spectacle. Blue sky, perfect sun banners fluttering with scripted optimism. I parked a half-mile away and watched through binoculars as guests gathered, local reporters, investors, residents with plastic smiles. Balloons bobbed above the HOA sign. A catering truck unloaded coffee, urns, and trays of muffins. It was theater, pure and shameless. Charlotte arrived last, stepping out of a silver SUV like royalty, descending onto her balcony. Her red suit gleamed, her hair was sculpted into something that probably cost more than my first truck. She hugged people she'd probably overcharged, kissed cheeks, shook hands. To them, she wasn't a fraud, she was a visionary. At exactly 10, the microphone crackled. "Welcome, everyone," she beamed. "Today we celebrate Progress Community Future," the crowd clapped. Behind her, the condos loomed soulless boxes of drywall and ego. I took one last breath, checked my watch, and radioed Randy. Engines on. The sound began as a low growl faint under the applause. Then it grew a chorus of diesel, a mechanical heartbeat rising from behind the trees. The first bulldozer rolled into Viewblade, glinting in the Sunday. People turned. Confusion spread like ripples on a pond. Then the second dozer appeared, followed by the excavator, its long arm swinging slow and deliberate. Charlotte froze mid-sentence. Her smile faltered. What is that?" I stepped from my truck, walked straight through the stunned crowd, and climbed onto the podium. Cameras pivoted toward me. I saw the red lights blinking. Perfect. I took the microphone from her trembling hand. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Cole Mercer. I am the legal owner of this land. And as of this morning, every structure you see behind me is condemned." Gasps, murmurs. Someone shouted, "That can't be legal." "Oh, it's legal," I said, pulling the folded injunction from my jacket. Signed by Judge Garvey at 7:42 a.m. This development was built without the owner's consent, over a protected utility easement in violation of city and state codes. I handed the document to a reporter in the front row. "You can verify it yourself." Charlotte lunged for the mic. "This man is deranged. Security, remove him." Her guard's hesitated eyes darting to the massive machinery idling just yards away. The ground trembled as the excavator revved its engine. I looked at her and spoke into the microphone, calm and clear. "You poured concrete over my wife's grave. Now I'm here to return the favor to your lies." Behind me, Randy gave the signal. The excavator's bucket swung forward and slammed through the nearest wall. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and a cloud of dust billowed into the morning air. Screams erupted. Cameras whirred. The second bulldozer plowed through a half-built garage, folding it like paper. Charlotte shrieked, "Stop! This is destruction of property." "It's not your property," I said. "It's mine." The media captured every second the machines tearing through illegal condos, while the HOA board watched their empire crumble in real time. Reporters shouted questions. The crowd scattered. Charlotte collapsed into a chair, her red suit flecked with dust mascara streaking down her cheeks. By the time the sheriff arrived, it was over. The news vans had their story. The world had their footage. And I finally had my justice. That night, the headline on the local news read, "HOA development demolished during grand opening, owner claims legal authority." They called it shocking. I called it closure. But deep down, I knew this war wasn't done yet. Charlotte Voss wasn't the kind to surrender quietly. She'd come for me again, and next time she wouldn't bring lawyers. She'd bring something far worse: revenge. If you've never watched a person's empire collapse in real time, let me tell you, it doesn't crumble, it screams. The morning after the demolition, Charlotte Voss's Heritage in Progress sign lay bent beside the access road, half buried in the same mud she'd once called prime real estate. News vans still crowded the shoulder. Every local station had replayed the footage, bulldozers grinding through half-built condos while I stood on the podium calm as judgment. Overnight, I'd gone from stubborn old veteran to folk hero. But heroes don't sleep much. My phone was a war zone: lawyers, reporters, death threats, and marriage proposals, sometimes all in the same voicemail. Marisol told me to stay quiet, keep my head down, and let the paperwork do the talking. But silence never suited me, especially when I knew the real storm hadn't even started. Charlotte predictably launched her counterattack before breakfast. She called a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by 2 lawyers and a photographer from Austin Daily Homes. Her makeup was perfect again: red suit, cleaned voice, trembling just enough for sympathy. "Yesterday's tragedy," she began, "was the act of a deranged individual, a man still grieving his wife's death, whose mental instability led to violence against our peaceful community." She didn't even flinch saying it. "Mr. Mercer destroyed affordable housing meant for veterans and young families. His actions were reckless, criminal, and deeply un-American." Un-American. I laughed when I saw that clip. I'd served 2 tours overseas, building bases out of dust and shrapnel, and now the woman who paved over my wife's ashes was lecturing me about patriotism. But her lie worked, at least for a few hours. The story spread like wildfire across social media. Some people believed her. Others didn't care about truth. They just wanted drama. One local blogger even nicknamed me the Demo Bandit. I didn't mind. Bandits at least steal back what's theirs. By noon, though, the narrative started to rot. Marisol called. She overplayed her hand, she said, amusement leaking through her exhaustion. Rivero Buildco just filed a civil complaint against her. They're claiming she falsified ownership documents to secure investor capital. Their lawyers discovered the missing county records, the ones Frank hid for us. It's game over. But Charlotte wasn't done swinging. Her next move was pure desperation. She and Derek filed an emergency injunction claiming my demolition violated HOA property rights and endangered public safety. The irony almost made me choke on my coffee. They even attached a fake lien document typed in Comic Sans no less, stating my bulldozers were trespassing assets. Marisol marched that mess straight to Judge Garvey's courtroom. She played it simple: real deed, real injunction, real permit. 10 minutes later, the judge dismissed their filing and fined their attorney for wasting court time. When he slammed the gavel, I knew we'd just won the first real round. But Charlotte was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals don't care about rules. That night around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cameras around my property. I blinked blearily at the feed-grainy black and white rain misting across the lens and then froze. A figure moved along the fence line, slender, wrapped in a dark hoodie. The person paused near the garage, crouched and fiddled with something shiny. I zoomed in and saw her face as lightning flashed. Charlotte. I dialed the sheriff before my brain caught up with my pulse. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights off. The deputies moved quiet as ghosts. I watched through the window as they caught her mid-crouch flashlight beams, pinning her like a moth. When they searched her bag, they found a small audio recorder, a packet of zip ties, and a printed page with my daughter Avery's work schedule. In her car, the address of my grandkids' school. I'd thought I hated her before. I hadn't even scratched the surface. She screamed as they cuffed her, accusing me of setting her up. But the deputies had body cams, and my security feed captured everything. There was no setup, just a predator who'd finally run out of shadows. They booked her for trespassing, stalking, and tampering with private property. The arrest detonated across the community like fireworks. Half the HOA board resigned overnight. Investors bailed. Rivero's CEO went on live TV and publicly apologized, calling the project a regrettable misstep in oversight. Even the city council scrambled to distance themselves, announcing a thorough internal audit that was basically code for, "We don't want to get sued." Meanwhile, I sat on my porch, a cup of black coffee, steaming in the dawn chill, watching the chaos unfold on the news. It should have felt triumphant, but mostly it felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm when you're not sure if you've won or just survived. Avery showed up later that morning. She didn't say a word at first, just walked over, hugged me tight, and stayed there. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. "Dad," she had the kid's school address. What if the police hadn't come? I held her tighter. "They did. And it's over now. Is it?" I looked out toward the cleared field where piles of shattered lumber still lay like bones. "Not yet, but we're close." 2 days later, Marisol called again, this time with a grin in her voice. "You might want to turn on Channel 6. The screen showed an exclusive report. Leaked audio from HOA president reveals deliberate fraud. The video played a phone call between Charlotte and her contractor, the one Priya's contacts had slipped to us weeks earlier. Charlotte's voice was unmistakable. "I don't care about old surveys," she'd said. "Build now, apologize later. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission." The broadcast cut to residents of Magnolia Bluffs reacting. Some looked shocked, others furious. One woman shook her head. "She told us everything was legal," she said. "We trusted her." By evening, the remaining board members held an emergency vote. The HOA was dissolved unanimously, 43-0. The sheriff's department confirmed Charlotte would face additional charges for attempted bribery of a public official after she'd tried to hand cash to Inspector Ruiz weeks earlier. They even released the recorded conversation, Charlotte's voice pleading, "We can make this disappear, Hector. Think of it as community support." It was the final nail. The next morning, I drove back to the property. The sky was wide and clean. My crew had been working quietly for days, dismantling what remained of the illegal condos piece by piece, recycling the wood, salvaging the metal. No explosions, no theatrics. Just steady, deliberate undoing. Randy waved from the excavator, his grin visible even under a dust mask. "Almost done, boss. Only 2 skeletons left." "Good," I said. "Make sure we leave the soil clean. No trace of their poison." When the last wall came down, I walked to the spot where the oak had once stood. The air smelled of wet earth and diesel, but for the first time in months, I could actually hear birds again. I crouched, brushed my fingers through the dirt, and whispered, "We did it, Lena. They won't touch this ground again." For the next week, life slowly settled into something resembling peace. The county, embarrassed by how badly they'd botched the oversight, offered a settlement enough to cover every cent of demolition cleanup and damages. Marisol handled it like a lioness. She pushed for a clause in the agreement mandating future HOAs in the county undergo independent land verification audits before expansion. The media dubbed it the Mercer Clause. But not everyone was thrilled. Some residents from Magnolia Bluffs came by guilt heavy in their voices. One, a thin man named David, stood on my porch, hat in hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said, eyes down. "I was part of the board. I didn't know what she was doing, not really. We just believed her." "I know," I said. "Belief's a dangerous thing when it's cheaper than truth." He nodded, shame written all over him. "We want to make it right. Some of us are starting a volunteer group, no board, no dues. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Thought you should know." For the first time I smiled. "That's a start, David. Just don't call it an HOA." That evening, as the sun bled gold across the hills, Avery sat beside me on the porch swing. The kids played in the grass, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. "You know," she said softly, "Mom would have liked this view." "Yeah," I whispered. "That's why I fought for it." We sat there in silence, listening to the wind sweep across the open land that was finally ours again. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste like dust or rage, it tasted like home. If justice were a machine, it would move slow, but when it finally rolls, it crushes everything in its path. 3 weeks after the demolition, the county courthouse in Austin became the arena for the final act of the Magnolia Bluffs disaster. The press called it the HOA trial of the century, though public reckoning would have been more accurate. Charlotte Voss, once the self-proclaimed visionary of suburban excellence, now looked like a deflated balloon in beige prison scrubs. Her perfect hair had collapsed into something that looked more human, and that somehow made her crimes look worse. She'd been charged with forgery, fraud, bribery of a public official, and criminal trespass. Derek Pruitt, her sidekick, had already flipped on her for a plea deal. He'd handed over emails proving everything falsified, survey maps, investor kickbacks, even a message where she joked, "He's too old to notice a bulldozer." I sat in the front row, arms crossed, trying to feel nothing, but watching her whisper to her attorney like a trapped snake, I realized something: she still believed she could talk her way out. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters filled every seat. The judge, an older man with a voice like gravel, opened the hearing with dry efficiency. "Miss Voss, the state of Texas vs.com. Magnolia Bluffs Homeowners Association is not a misunderstanding. It's a crime scene. You may proceed." Her lawyer, a corporate suit imported from Dallas, tried to paint her as a misled civic leader. "She relied on faulty documents, Your Honor. Any errors were bureaucratic, not criminal." Marisol stood up for my side, calm and razor-sharp. "Faulty documents don't come with forged signatures and wire transfers to personal accounts." She dropped a folder on the table with a satisfying thud. Inside were bank records showing that Charlotte had funneled $2 million of investor money into a company registered under her husband's name. The judge lifted a brow. "Would you like to explain this?" Miss Voss, Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came out. Then the clerk played the recorded call, the one everyone had already seen on TV, where she said, "Build now, apologize later." The courtroom fell silent. Charlotte's face drained of color. Marisol leaned forward. No further questions. By lunch, the jury didn't even need deliberation. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Charlotte's empire, which she'd built on lies, paperwork, and ego, came down faster than one of my controlled demolitions. The judge sentenced her to 10 years, 5 for fraud, 5 for bribery, and ordered restitution to every homeowner and investor she'd deceived. The HOA was formally dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay damages. When the gavel hit the block, the sound felt like thunder breaking open the clouds. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited like vultures. Reporters swarmed as soon as I stepped out. "Mr. Mercer, any comments on the verdict?" I looked past them at the skyline, the same city that had ignored the fake surveys for years. "Yeah," I said. "If people spent half as much time reading the fine print as they do writing bylaws, none of this would have happened." They laughed. It wasn't meant to be funny. The following week, Rivero Build Co. publicly apologized and donated $500,000 to the county trade school's safety program in memory of the victims of administrative negligence. I didn't miss the irony. Their victims were themselves. Still, I wasn't bitter. I'd seen what greed does: it eats its own. While the lawyers tied up loose ends, I focused on rebuilding what mattered. My crew finished clearing the last rubble pile, smoothing the land into gentle slopes like it used to be. The air smelled of cedar and redemption. Then came the moment that mattered more than any courtroom victory: replanting the oak. It was a young tree, maybe 10 feet tall, with a thick trunk and deep green leaves. I'd chosen it from the same nursery where Lena and I had bought our first saplings decades ago. Randy brought his backhoe careful as a surgeon, while my grandkids held little shovels like soldiers preparing for battle. Avery stood beside me, eyes misting. "This is it, huh?" she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied. "This one's got strong roots." Together we lowered the oak into the ground. I packed the soil with my hands, feeling the weight of it, the life returning to a place that had been a wound for too long. When it was done, Chloe placed a small stone she'd painted with a bright yellow sun at the base. "For Grandma," she whispered. That simple moment, no cameras, no applause, meant more than the entire trial. Over the next few months, life slowly rearranged itself. The county finalized the settlement. They paid my company's full invoice for the demolition, plus damages for emotional distress. I didn't want to take it at first. It felt like blood money, but Avery reminded me we could make it right. So we did. We established the Lena Mercer Scholarship Fund, dedicated to women studying structural engineering, surveying, or environmental law. I told Marisol it was my way of making sure the next generation of builders and inspectors would know how to protect people, not just property lines. She smiled and said, "That's the best demolition you've ever done." The story of Magnolia Bluffs didn't end there. The state legislature used it as a case study to pass the Homeowner Integrity Act, informally called the Mercer Rule. It required HOAs across Texas to publicly notify and obtain written consent from all adjacent landowners before any new development. Bureaucratic revenge, the best kind. Even local real estate agencies changed their sales pitch: HOA-free communities, available, peace of mind guaranteed. Turns out freedom sells better than fences. Charlotte, meanwhile, adjusted to her new empire behind bars. A reporter told me she was organizing other inmates into something she called the Facility Cleanliness Committee. Some people never change. As for me, I went back to doing what I loved: controlled demolitions, but this time for the right reasons. I even started teaching at the trade school every Thursday night. The first lesson I gave was titled "The Physics of Collapse and the Morality of Construction." Half the class laughed at the title until I told them the story of Magnolia Bluffs. Then they went quiet. One student asked, "Sir, what did it feel like, watching it all come down?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Like breathing after holding your breath for years," I said. By spring, the cabin was half built. We used reclaimed wood from the old condos, ironic, maybe poetic. The walls went up slow, the way real homes should. Each plank carried a story, one of defiance, loss, and reclamation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Avery and I sat on the half-finished porch with glasses of sweet tea. The grandkids ran barefoot through the grass, chasing fireflies. The new oak swayed gently nearby, catching the orange light. She looked at me and said, "You finally kept your promise, didn't you?" I nodded. "Yeah, I told your mom I'd build a place where we could remember her, and where the land could remember us." The cicadas hummed, the world settled, and for the first time since that first concrete foundation poured over my wife's ashes, I felt peace. But peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of noise. It's the sound of everything that tried to bury you finally going quiet. The land was mine again, not because of a deed, but because I'd earned it twice over, once through sweat and once through fire. And maybe, just maybe, through the laughter of my grandkids echoing through that open field, Lena finally had the home I'd promised her all those years ago. It's strange what silence sounds like after you've spent months in a war you didn't start. Some mornings I'd step outside with a cup of coffee and just listen. No generators, no nail guns, no HOA clipboard warriors taking photos of unsightly activity. Just wind brushing through the trees and the faint creak of the porch we'd built by hand. It had been 4 months since the trial. Charlotte Voss was locked away, Derek was bankrupt, and Magnolia Bluffs had become a ghost subdivision, its streets half-paved, its lampposts leaning like exhausted soldiers. The sign that once boasted "Heritage in Progress" now sagged under rain and graffiti. Someone had spray-painted over the slogan, "Progress ends here." I couldn't have said it better. Still, not everything felt clean. I kept getting letters, anonymous ones. Some were thank yous from nearby homeowners, people who'd watched my fight and found their own courage to stand up to their HOAs. Others were nastier, scrawled in angry marker, "You destroyed our property values. Hope you rot. You're the reason my husband lost his investment." I threw those in a drawer unopened after the first few. But one morning, an envelope caught my eye. No return address, but the handwriting was delicate, precise, almost formal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mr. Mercer I was one of the architects hired by Rivero Build Co. to design the Phase 4 units. I had no idea the land was stolen until after the demolition. I just wanted you to know, I saved something before the site was cleared. In my blueprints folder, I found an original landscape plan. It shows your oak tree marked as a decorative removal. I thought you'd want it back. Respectfully, M. Sutter. Attached was the drawing, a technical sketch, neat lines and measurements, and in the lower right corner, the symbol for existing vegetation to remove. Next to it, Mercer Oak. I sat there for a long time just staring at that phrase. It hit harder than any insult or court battle. To them, Lena's resting place had been nothing but a line item, a checkbox on a spreadsheet labeled removal. I framed the blueprint that afternoon and hung it in my workshop. Right above it, I nailed a photo of the new oak we'd planted. The contrast felt like a lesson carved into wood, what greed erases, love rebuilds. The following week, Priya came by to drop off updated survey maps. The county finalized the boundaries, she said, waving the folder. Your parcels are locked in tighter than Fort Knox now. They even color-coded the easement zones, so future idiots can't pretend they don't exist. She handed me a second envelope. And this one's from the city council. They want you to speak at the new Landowner Rights Summit next month. Apparently you're their poster child for reform. I laughed. You mean they finally figured out paperwork has consequences? Priya grinned. Something like that. But honestly, Cole, you should go. Tell your story before someone else rewrites it. I thought about it. I'd spent my whole life tearing things down, not giving speeches, but maybe it was time to build something less tangible. So I said yes. The summit was held downtown in a convention center that smelled like new carpet and government money. They put my name on a banner, Cole Mercer, property rights and personal redemption. I nearly turned around and walked out when I saw that word redemption, like I'd been the one needing it. But when I stepped onto the stage and saw 100 faces, homeowners, small builders, young engineers, even a few lawmakers, I realized they weren't here for me. They were here because of what the story meant, so I told it. I told them about my father clearing that land with a rusted chainsaw in bare hands, about Lena and the oak tree and the promise I made when we buried her ashes, about the forged surveys, the humiliation at the clubhouse, the court battles, and the bulldozers rolling in during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't have to. The truth already sounded like fiction. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping slow, steady, spreading like a wave. A woman in a suit wiped her eyes. A man in construction boots shouted, "Damn right you did." Afterward, a young guy, maybe mid-20s, approached me. "Mr. Mercer, I work for the county zoning office," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say, we've started double verifying every annexation request now. Your case changed the checklist." I shook his hand. Good. That's all I wanted. As I left, I realized something simple but profound. Justice isn't a moment. It's a ripple. You throw one stone of truth into a dirty pond, and sooner or later the whole surface clears. A few weeks later, I got another unexpected visitor, David, the former HOA board member who'd apologized months earlier. He stood on my porch holding a grocery bag. "My wife baked," he said, sheepish. "Figured I owed you more than words." He handed me a pie and an envelope. Inside was a petition signed by nearly every former resident of Magnolia Bluffs, 50 names in all. We, the undersigned, request that the former site of Magnolia Bluffs be converted into a public nature reserve under the name Mercer Oaks Preserve. I stared at him. "You serious?" He nodded. "We've been working with the county parks department. They said if you agree to donate half the parcel, they'll match it and fund the restoration." I didn't answer right away. I looked out across the field, the open earth where Condos once stood, the place that had cost me so much. Then I looked back at David. "You know what? Let's do it. But there's one condition." "What's that?" "The park sign has to read, 'Dedicated to all who were told they couldn't.'" He grinned. "Done." That summer, the land transformed again, but this time by choice. City crews planted wild grasses and native trees. Volunteers built walking trails and picnic areas. I watched kids ride bikes where bulldozers once sat idle. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the opening day of the preserve, Avery brought the grandkids. Chloe ran straight to the young oak, taller now, its leaves shimmering in the sunlight. She hugged the trunk and shouted, "This is Grandma's tree." People nearby smiled. Some even clapped. I stood there quietly, feeling something settle deep inside me, a peace that didn't need to announce itself. Later, as the crowd thinned, I sat on a bench facing the field. The wind carried the faint scent of cedar and cut grass. For the first time in years, the land didn't feel like a battlefield or a grave. It felt alive. Randy walked up beside me, hands in his pockets. You know, he said, if you'd told me 2 years ago we'd turn a demolition site into a park, I'd have called you crazy. I smirked. You did call me crazy, he laughed. Yeah, well, turns out crazy builds pretty good legacies. I looked at the oak, its shadow stretching long across the grass. No, Randy, I said softly. Crazy just means you cared when nobody else did. That night, back at the cabin, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and stepped onto the porch. The stars were sharp and bright, the air cool. I could hear frogs by the creek, the distant hum of the highway, and the slow rhythm of peace settling where noise used to live. On the table beside me lay a faded photo, Lena standing under the original oak, smiling. I traced her outline with my thumb. We did it, sweetheart, I whispered. We kept it safe. A breeze rustled through the leaves of the new tree outside. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Either way, I took another sip, leaned back in the rocking chair my father had built, and let the silence do what it was meant to hold the weight of everything we'd torn down and everything we'd built again. The land was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who needed a reminder that justice, real earned justice, can grow back from ashes and concrete. And as the moon rose over Mercer Oaks Preserve, I realized something simple and final. They built their empire on lies. I built mine on roots. 6 months after the opening of Mercer Oaks Preserve, the seasons had started to turn. Texas summer had mellowed into a slow amber fall, and the air carried the scent of pine, earth, and new beginnings. The field that once groaned under concrete and steel was now a sea of gold and green native grasses swaying in rhythm with the wind. Wildflowers dotted the slopes where bulldozers had once left tire marks. And in the center of it all, the young oak stretched taller every week, its branches strong leaves flickering like tiny emerald flags of victory. I'd gotten used to people visiting the preserve. Families walked the new trails, joggers passed by at sunrise, and kids built makeshift forts out of branches in the shade near the creek. Every once in a while, someone would recognize me and stop to shake my hand. They'd say, "You're the guy who fought the HOA, right?" At first, I hated that title. I didn't want to be remembered as the guy who fought something. I wanted to be remembered for what we built afterward. But over time, I realized it didn't matter. People remembered because they needed to believe you could fight back and win. One afternoon, as I was raking leaves by the cabin porch, a city truck pulled up. Out stepped Councilwoman Ramirez, the same official who'd once signed off on the fraudulent HOA expansion. I half expected her to come with excuses, but she surprised me. "Mr. Mercer," she said, adjusting her jacket nervously, "I wanted to thank you in person. The Mercer rule just passed statewide. Every HOA in Texas is now required to file open access notices before annexing land. You changed the system." I looked out over the field, watching a hawk wheel above the trees. "It wasn't just me," I said. "It was every neighbor who got tired of signing checks for someone else's dream." She smiled faintly. "Still, you lit the fuse." Before she left, she handed me a bronze plaque freshly polished. It read, "Mercer Oaks Preserve, dedicated to Cole and Lena Mercer," for reminding us that land holds memory and truth holds ground. I stood there for a while holding the plaque. The sunlight caught the engraving, and I swear for a moment I could almost hear Lena's laugh in the breeze. Later that week, Avery stopped by with the kids. She'd been promoted regional project manager at an environmental engineering firm. Watching her stride across the field in her boots and work jacket, clipboard in hand, I realized something she'd inherited: my stubborn streak. "City wants to partner with us," she said proudly. "We're expanding the preserve's trail system and adding a learning center for local schools. They want to teach kids about land stewardship, conservation, and civic responsibility." Chloe tugged at my sleeve, her smile wide and wild. "Grandpa, can we build birdhouses for the new trail?" "Of course," I said. "But only if you paint them bright. No HOA beige allowed." She giggled, and I could have sworn the oak rustled in agreement. That night, after they'd gone, I sat by the fire pit behind the cabin. The stars shimmered above, like they used to when I was young, before paperwork and politics made everything complicated. Randy joined me, a beer in one hand and a grin in the other. "You see the news?" he asked. "They're talking about doing a documentary. The Man Who Tore Down the HOA. Has a ring to it, huh?" I rolled my eyes. "Sounds like a bad action movie." "Hey, I'd watch it. Maybe they'll get some Hollywood guy to play you. Jeff Bridges, maybe, huh? More like Clint Eastwood if he'd had back surgery." We laughed until the fire cracked and the conversation drifted to quieter places. Then Randy said something that stuck. "You know, Cole, you didn't just win a fight. You taught people the value of saying no. That's rare these days." He was right. Saying no to corruption, to fear, to compromise had cost me plenty, but it had given something back to dignity. A few days later, I was invited to the trade school where we'd established the Lena Mercer Scholarship Fund. The students had built a model exhibit on demolition safety and land ethics. They'd even recreated a miniature version of Magnolia Bluffs, complete with tiny bulldozers and a model oak tree. One student, a girl with grease on her hands and fire in her eyes, stood up during the Q&A and asked Mr. Mercer, how do you know when to fight and when to walk away? I thought for a moment before answering. When someone threatens what's yours, what you love, you fight. But when you've reclaimed it, when you've built something better, you walk away with grace. Winning isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. The whole class went silent, and I realized I'd just said something I'd needed to hear myself. Afterward, they gave me a hard hat signed by every student in the program. Across the brim, someone had written in black marker, "You can't vote against gravity." That made me laugh. Maybe that would be my next motto. One cool November morning, I woke before dawn. The land outside shimmered under a thin mist, the kind that makes the world look half-made. I brewed coffee and sat by the cabin window, watching the first light touch the new oak. It had doubled in height. The trunk was sturdy now, the bark rough to the touch in its roots, while they were deep enough that no one would ever move it again. I walked outside barefoot, feeling the chill of the earth. Standing beneath its branches, I spoke softly like an old habit I couldn't shake. "You see this, Lena. You'd like it here. The air's clean, the ground's strong, and we're all right." A breeze stirred, carrying the faintest scent of rain. I smiled. I'll take that as a yes. That evening, the city held a small ceremony at the preserve. They unveiled the bronze plaque I'd been given. Dozens of people gathered, families, workers, even a few of the same neighbors who once shouted me down at that HOA meeting. No one mentioned the past. They didn't need to. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from the notes I'd written. Instead, I just told them what I'd learned. I used to think land was about ownership, I began. About deeds, boundaries, and fences. But this place taught me something different. Land remembers. It remembers who cared for it and who tried to take from it. It holds grudges, sure, but it also forgives. I looked at the kids sitting cross-legged on the grass. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that no matter how much concrete someone pours over the truth, it's still down there, waiting. You just have to dig for it. When the applause came, it wasn't loud, it was warm, genuine, and that was enough. Later that night, Avery and the kids stayed over. We roasted marshmallows by the fire while the stars burned bright above the hill. Chloe pointed upward. "Grandpa, which one's Grandma's star?" I smiled. "The brightest one you can see. Because she's stubborn, she refuses to dim for anyone." They laughed, and for a moment the world felt whole again. As the fire faded, I glanced toward the oak, its silhouette dark and steady against the moonlight. I thought about everything that tree represented: loss, defiance, justice, renewal, and maybe something even simpler: proof that no matter how deep they bury you, you can still grow back stronger. I leaned back in the chair, the sound of crickets filling the silence, and let the warmth of the fire and the laughter of my family wash over me. The fight was over. The land had healed, and so had I. Winter came slow to Texas that year. By December, the air carried that soft bite that wakes you up a little faster in the mornings, and the oak, my oak, our oak, stood stripped but unbroken against the pale sky. Its roots were deep now, the trunk sturdy enough that Chloe could wrap her arms around it and still not reach halfway. Every time I saw that tree, it reminded me of something my father once said: "You can't force something to grow right. You just give it time, space, and a reason." That line had become my creed. And now, for the first time in decades, I felt like I was living it. The preserve had turned into something much bigger than I'd ever expected. A few college students started a podcast about the Mercer story, mixing drone footage of the land with clips from my speeches. Reporters came and went. Even a small film crew from PBS called to interview me for a documentary on ordinary Americans reshaping their communities. I didn't feel ordinary. I felt tired. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that means you finished building something that matters. One evening I stood on the porch with Avery as the last of the light disappeared behind the ridge. She'd just gotten word that her company had been awarded a contract to oversee new waterway protections across the county. "Guess I'm becoming my dad after all," she said with a small smile. "You're becoming better," I replied. "You're building instead of just fighting." She laughed. "You sure you're done fighting?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the tree, its branches cutting black shapes into the fading orange sky. Maybe not, but I'm fighting for peace now, not revenge. That night, as the fireplace crackled and the kids drifted off to sleep in the loft, I opened the old wooden box that had belonged to my father. Inside were a few things: his dog tags, a faded photograph of him standing beside that first Ford tractor, and the deed yellowed, now edges curled but still strong. It hit me that this paper had outlived wars, recessions, and greed. And it would outlive me, too. I ran my hand over his signature at the bottom, Harlan Mercer, 1968. I whispered to the quiet room. You were right, Dad. It was never just about the land. The next morning, I drove into town to meet Priya and Marisol at the courthouse. We had one last piece of business to close, transferring half of my parcel officially to the county for the preserve. It wasn't just symbolic, it made sure no future HOA developer or politician could ever touch it again. Marisol looked at me across the polished conference table. You sure about this, Cole? Once you sign this over, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said, pen in hand. It's not mine anymore. It's everyone's. When the ink dried, I felt lighter, like some invisible chain had finally loosened. A month later, the documentary crew arrived. They wanted to film me walking through the preserve at sunrise, telling my story in my own words. I agreed on one condition: no scripts, no retakes. Real life doesn't get edited, I told them. So that's what we did. The morning was crisp fog hanging low over the grass. I wore my old work jacket, the same one I'd worn the day of the demolition. We walked slowly along the trail until we reached the oak. I stopped there, rested my hand against the bark, and looked into the camera. They built 28 condos here, I began quietly. They bulldozed a man's memory. My wife's ashes were buried right under where we're standing. They said it was progress. They said it was too late to stop it. But they forgot something. Truth has roots. You can bury it for a while, but sooner or later it pushes through the concrete. The cameraman didn't move. The crew was silent, except for the faint hum of the equipment. I continued. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about respect. For the land, for the people who came before us, and for the ones who'll come after. My father taught me that if you take care of something real, it'll outlast every lie built on top of it. When they wrapped, one of the producers wiped her eyes. That's the ending, she whispered to her partner. I smiled. It's not the ending. It's just the part where we finally stop breaking things long enough to build again. That spring, they aired the documentary. It wasn't flashy, no explosions, no drama, music, just truth. Footage of bulldozers, courtroom scenes, and finally the image of the new oak standing tall. It ended with me sitting on the porch beside Avery, and the kids, the camera pulling back until the whole preserve filled the frame. The reaction stunned everyone. Within a week, the video went viral online. People from all over the country wrote letters, some telling their own HOA nightmares, others saying the story gave them courage to stand up to corruption in their neighborhoods. One message from a farmer in Oklahoma said simply, "You reminded me who owns the dirt, not the papers." That one stayed with me. By midsummer, the Mercer Oaks Preserve had become a local landmark. The trails were full every weekend. The trade school used the area for environmental surveying lessons, and the scholarship fund grew fast. Donations from builders, engineers, even a few of the same investors who'd once backed Charlotte's HOA. Funny how guilt can be so generous. But I wasn't bitter anymore. I'd learned that revenge only feels good until you realize it doesn't fix what's broken. Rebuilding does. One evening, we held a small memorial at the Oak. It had been exactly 2 years since the demolition. Avery, the kids, Randy, Priya, Marisol, and even a few of the old neighbors came. We brought lanterns, soft music, and stories. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about lawsuits or permits. I just said, this tree isn't just mine. It's every promise that ever got broken and rebuilt. Every piece of truth that survived the bulldozer. And every voice that refused to stay quiet. Then I looked down at Chloe, who was holding a mason jar full of fireflies. Your grandma would have liked those, I said. She said she'll keep them safe, Chloe whispered back. I smiled. That's what grandmas do. As the lanterns rose into the night sky, drifting upward like quiet prayers, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't need words. The kind that just is. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the governor's office. Inside was a formal certificate naming the Mercer Oak an official heritage tree of the state of Texas. Beneath the seal it read, "In recognition of courage, stewardship, and the unyielding belief that justice, like nature, always finds its way through the cracks." I framed it beside the old deed and the blueprint that had labeled the oak as decorative removal, a before and after in one picture frame. Proof that even paperwork could be rewritten if you fought hard enough. That night I poured a small glass of bourbon, sat on the porch, and listened to the chorus of crickets and the laughter of my grandchildren through the cabin window. The air was cool, the land was quiet, and for the first time in a lifetime, I realized something simple but true. I wasn't just guarding my property. I was keeping a promise to Lena, to my father, to myself, and maybe to everyone who'd ever been told to give up because the papers said so. The oak rustled softly in the night wind, and I closed my eyes. "Rest easy," I whispered. "We're home." And for once, there was nothing left to fight for. only to protect, to teach, and to remember, because the land endures, and now so did we. If this story taught me anything, it's that justice isn't loud, it's patient, it grows in silence while arrogance crumbles under its own weight. You don't need power or permission to do what's right, you just need persistence proof and the kind of love that refuses to quit. We live in a world where people think ownership means control, but the truth, ownership is responsibility. Land, family, legacy, these things aren't possessions, they're promises, and every promise is sacred. So if you ever find yourself standing against a storm, against corruption, greed, or lies, remember this: roots don't retreat. They dig in deeper. Let your actions speak louder than your anger. Let your integrity outlast their noise. And when you win, because you will build something beautiful on the ground they tried to take from you. If this story touched, you drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that truth, like nature, always finds a way, subscribe and stay for the next story.